Lexi Chalat, Director of World Cup Legacy at Qatar Foundation. So Lexi is currently overseeing the legacy strategy for the FIFA World Cup Qatar 2022 at the Qatar Foundation. Prior to this, Lex has an impressive CV, working in a number of sport for good organisations actually, and I'm going to come back to you and ask a question in just a sec. Next up we've got Kat Craig, CEO of Athlead, a sport and social impact consultancy, take a seat Kat, helping athletes to create change. Alongside this, Kat holds a number of senior advisor roles centred around human rights and is very well known for award-winning work, evacuating the women's national football team from Afghanistan. Jürgen, come and join us please, co-founder of Common Goal, a serial entrepreneur who's enthusiastic about system change and collaboration in order to create sustainable and importantly scalable social change. And finally, last but not least, Preeti Shetty, CEO of Upshot, a social enterprise that helps non-profits monitor and share their and we're going to get straight into some conversations, okay? Welcome everybody, and thank you for travelling from far and wide to join us today. It's really, really brilliant to have you indeed. Lex, let's come to you first. So, all of your experiences, I can only summarise to a small point there, but it screams vocation. Everything that you've been involved with screams vocation. So just tell a little bit more about yourself and why that's a passion of yours and been a real drive.
Thanks, and so lovely to be here, and it's so brilliant to see a full room. It's absolutely refreshing to see this and see you guys care so much about this. I started, actually, I was an athlete all my life. I was an elite gymnast. I competed in college, and I was always raised to care and to the importance of giving back and the importance of civic leadership. And as I graduated, I knew I wanted to be a journalist and tell stories about people. And I ended up landing in a position in Southwest Philadelphia, which is a really underserved, struggling area of Philly, but also of the U.S. And during that time, I just really saw the unique way that sport could address key issues where kind of traditional forms of aid really fell down. And I became incredibly passionate about that. I wrote about it. I researched it. I thought about it a lot, and I chose to kind of go down that path instead of write about it, actually do it. And London won the Olympics in 2008, and right at that time, Beyond Sport was launched. Sort of as this entity that sort of funded, advised, convened the use of sport and social change. And I essentially worked with that organization for about 10 years all over the world. I lived and worked in over 20 countries, really seeing the way that communities were shaped and formed as a result of amazing, really purposeful and intentional sports programs. And through that time, I worked on lots of major sporting events and saw how major sporting events could and could not actually make positive impacts. London 2012 was an amazing example, but South Africa 2010, which is where I met Jürgen for the first time, just could really see the amazing kind of outcomes of really, again, intentional programs. And so when Qatar Foundation called me up and said that they needed someone to come run their legacy programs around the World Cup 2022, which we all know really, really needed some positive social intrinsic kind of look at what they were doing. I packed my bags with my husband and we moved to Qatar, and I've been there for just over 2 years and focusing on some key legacy programs, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a minute.
Absolutely, we will. Thank you so much. And Kat, such a variety of experiences and successes yourself. What drives you in this field of work?
Yeah, I think that for me, essentially, happiness is figuring out what you're good at and using it to help other people. And for me, there was a really strong opportunity. We saw an evolution in athlete activism about 10 years ago. In the US, you would see every rookie basketball player would set up their own foundation. Sometimes were really successful, sometimes they weren't. And so my background is as a human rights lawyer. That's the sector I've always worked in. But about 7 years ago, we decided to set up a specialist not-for-profit consultancy that worked initially with athletes and elite athletes solely to help them use their unique platform to leverage change. But over time, we've seen a real demand and a need by other stakeholders in the ecosystem to try and help them kind of respect and protect and promote human rights. So it's been a really interesting process, and one not without its challenges. I know that the theme for today is Be Inspired, and maybe some of you are really experienced and have been in the sector for a long time, and others haven't. And I found it really difficult, I'll be honest. It's easy to look back and have those accolades and have those successes and feel like it was a loose journey and it was kind of straightforward, and it wasn't. I found it really, really tough. I found it a really impenetrable sector, to be honest. It's much more relational than many other sectors. And it's thanks to a number of people in this room, on this panel, and I see many friends in the audience, that helped me find my tribe. Because in a sector that is so incredibly male-dominated and lacks diversity at every single level and every single intersectional way, it can be very exclusive. So it took a while, but I think I learned. For me, it was inspirational to see all of these opportunities, this untapped potential, and we saw a lot of people trying to do good and not be terribly successful or to fall down, and not for any other reason, particularly if you look at athletes, they're really, really good at the sport that they practice. There is a particular skill and art to creating social change and social impact. And just because it doesn't make money doesn't mean that it is easy. Just because it doesn't deliver profit doesn't mean that it doesn't require expertise. So we saw lots of people who were incredibly passionate, and we see the same, actually. I now work with UN agencies, with international federations, with governments, with leagues, with major sponsors and broadcasters. And they have exactly the same challenges. They think that you can employ the same strategy that you use to make money or to win medals to create social good, and it doesn't work. There is a technical skill required. So I think, for me, it has been at times really quite a challenging journey, but finding my people, treating it as a team sport, that really, really helped. Finding people who shared my values, that's when I started getting success and also real joy from it, was finding people whose values I shared, again, many of whom are in the room. And that then gave us that opportunity to move away from those transactional moments. You've all been in those networking rooms where someone's value scanning, right? They're talking to you and then they're looking around to see if there's someone more important. Bin them off, early doors, don't bother with them. Find people who share your values, who want to do the thing that you want to do, who are genuine about it, who are committed, and work with those people and stick to your principles. Don't avoid the difficult conversations. A lot of my work I had no intention when I transitioned from the work that I was doing in human rights to work a lot in sexual abuse, which we all know is now a major, major issue across sports, across continents, across genders. And there's people who are here today who I didn't know and to whom I was not a known entity, but who were really committed to keeping men and women in football safe and to having those difficult conversations, even if it meant speaking truth to power, even if it meant holding people to account and having conversations they didn't want to hold. And they're the people who've stayed with me, and together we've built teams, and we're kind of each other's ride or die. And I know eventually success comes through that as well, but sticking to your values and finding people who care, that's been a real joy, actually.
Yeah, I think that's such a great point, because ultimately, like you say, there's not necessarily loads of money in this social good piece, but it's purpose driven, and I think people are really united in the cause, because ultimately we know the difference it makes to people's lives, to communities right across the world, which is really exciting that you can be part of that. And that's why I think you do have that strong community. But body language as well, watch for that horizon scanning today, and as Kat said it, we move on. Jürgen, I mean, your experience is so varied. You do a huge amount in terms of collaboration. Tell us a bit more about your journey and why you were kind of driven in terms of social change and this area of focus.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm probably easily twice as old as most of you. So if I'm talking about the 90s, I'm referring to the last century. It was actually when I was close to turning 30 at the time. And I was about to become an academic. Went to do my PhD field studies in Colombia, in Latin America. That was like 93. And half year into the country, working at the university, there was the World Cup 94 in the US, the men's World Cup. And one of the Colombian national team players scored an own goal at the time, and 11 days later, when he came back, he was killed. So that was the club where my wife was working as a photographer. And that was the day where I stopped to be an academic. So I went to university and told everyone I wouldn't come back. I handed back my stipend, like my scholarship, and started to think about what to do with this. It took me 2 years of studying both on the streets and at the university to understand the phenomena of violence in Colombia at the time. And it was then a very unique situation, walking through one of those neighborhoods, seeing two groups walking towards a football field, like a neighborhood football field. And then all of a sudden, everybody put down something on the floor, and I got closer, and it was their weapons, actually. And then stepped on the field to just perform a football match you would just expect a football match to be. Like a normal football match where people would be happy, would enjoy their time, would be able to speak to each other, to communicate, to solve problems, conflicts, and just enjoy their time together. So that was when I thought, okay, football seems to be capable of something nothing else is actually capable of. It creates a space where people feel like they can work together towards a shared objective. And that apparently doesn't happen off this field. So that's when I got into Football for Good, if you want, on how to maximize football's contribution to people and planet. That then went on, or became a project in Colombia that was called Football for Peace at the time. And what it did, actually, it brought mortality down and it brought social mobility up, like people actually being able to move through their own city and be confident in public space, not to be killed. And then seeing that it worked in that place, I thought, okay, there must be other people thinking similar to that or having a similar experience to this. And this is like pre-internet, really, or pre-mobile phone. So it was really hard to surface all these best practices out there, these entrepreneurs who would be working in all kinds of different places. It became Street Football World at the time, and that the ambition was to really surface best practice of football being used to transform local realities. And after 10, 15 years into that, and having built like a global network of these local organizations, the idea was, okay, now we know how it works. Like now we have all the evidence, but it doesn't belong to football, like football industry, like male football industry. So how do we bridge that? And that was when we then founded Common Goal as a mechanic to really bake in like servant leadership, contribution to people and planet into the business plan of football, like into what football is about. We can talk about that later, but that was more or less the journey.
Brilliant, and so powerful. Nelson Mandela said, didn't he, sport has the power to change the world, and it does. And the beauty of football is such a huge sport globally. It has so much influence. It's very exciting to see what it can do, but we can also see some of the bad sides of what it doesn't do so well, and we'll obviously explore some of that. Preeti, yourself, you talked before about 20 odd years in the sport for development sector. Like, did you intentionally go into that space, or did you fall into that space? Like, how did you end up doing what you're doing now?
No, and it definitely wasn't planned. I didn't know it was a thing. I didn't know Jürgen existed at the time. I fell into it, as lots of people do. I got some work experience at the BBC, and it happened to be at BBC Sport, doing a wonderful outreach project called BBC Your Game, which is where I met my getters and lots of wonderful people that we know. It was meant to be 4 weeks, and so I did 4 weeks. I was doing my undergrad, and it was what we would now class as a football for development project, a football for good project, but basically it was an outreach program that used football as a hook to engage young people not in education, employment and training around the country. And so we got to travel around the country and talk to young people and figure out what they wanted to do and look at opportunities for employability and volunteering. And so I did 4 weeks, and the Beeb had a rule at the time, I don't know if they still do, after 4 weeks you either had to leave or they had to pay you. And so at the end of 4 weeks they said, do you want to stick around and we'll pay you? And I was like, cool, yeah, but I'm finishing my degree, but yes. And I stayed for 2 years, and it was incredible. And I had this real pivotal moment, like I think all of them have described, where I was like, oh wait, this thing changes lives. Like football has the power, sport, but that was a football project. Football has the power to change lives and communities, and I see it so clearly. And I decided at that point I was never going to do anything else ever again. And I'm very, very privileged that I've never done anything else ever again. And that not everybody has that opportunity. But for me, it was like, oh, this is it. I found my purpose, my why. Everybody needs to know about this thing, because I feel it every single day. And then that started a bit of a journey of like, I went to go find these football for development projects. Turns out there were loads of them all around the world doing amazing stuff. And so I very proactively reached out and said, I want to work for you. I want to do stuff. And I worked for some really brilliant projects that were using football as a tool to change lives. And then interestingly, through that journey, and a lot of them, at the time, especially with small NGOs, and they were doing brilliant work and struggling to get money to fund their brilliant work. And with small NGOs, everyone does everything. And so I was writing grant applications and I was doing impact reports. And there was this little box that funders have that say, tell us your impact. And I kept saying, how can I fit everything we do into this little box? That doesn't make any sense. The box isn't big enough for the work that we're doing. And it really bothered me, and it set me on this path of like, there must be a better way for us to measure impact, because this isn't it. And so I did my master's, and I was like, oh, I know exactly what I want to look at. And so I looked at research methods and measuring impact in the sport for development sector, the football for development sector. And so I did that, and while I was doing that, I heard that the Football Foundation, who I knew from my time at BBC Sport, at BBC Your Game, because this is a very small sector, and we're all very closely connected. And Rada was working at the Football Foundation at the time. It's a very small world. Anyway, I reached out and I heard they were building a tool, or they were starting to look at how they could measure impact. And so I reached out and I said, this is what I'm doing my dissertation on. And I was very, very lucky to be part of this brilliant year where the Football Foundation was trying to figure out, as a funder, how they could measure their own impact. Anyway, the Football Foundation built a thing called Upshot, basically a piece of software that helps organizations measure their impact and really look at their data and understand the change that they're making and how they can articulate it. And so when I finished my degree, I got a job at the Football Foundation working on Upshot. Then I ran it for a few years, and then 2 years ago I bought it off the Football Foundation and set it up as its own entity, as a social enterprise. And so now I spend every single day helping not just sport organizations. We work with the criminal justice system and public health and education, because really we're all trying to do the same thing. We're delivering interventions hoping that change will happen. And so my job and my team's job is, how do we help you measure that, and how do we help you articulate that? And for me, it's the biggest joy. It's very boring for lots of people, like talking about monitoring and evaluation. But for me, it's brilliant to be able to play my very small part of this brilliant sector, to be able to say, I know you're doing good stuff, let me help you prove it. Because it's really important that we prove it.
Our biggest joy is watching you geek out.
I know, I'm like such a nerd about this stuff.
Yeah, but every organisation needs that. Everybody
exactly.
needs that. And that, having spent 20 plus years in it, like the biggest game changer for me when I was CEO of Greater Sport was when we could talk about the evidence we had and the insight we could produce on the back of that, and therefore the bigger, more compelling cases you can take to funders to say, look, this is making a difference, and not just in this particular aspect of somebody's life, but actually across communities. And I think your point around, and I imagine all of us have had moments of this. I started at Greater Sport on a work placement. 6 weeks, can I stay? I'd really like to stay while I finish my degree. I left 15 years later, having been the CEO for 4 years. So never underestimate the power of that phone call, that LinkedIn request, that volunteering, that giving your time, because in this world, for social change, it's absolutely the entry point, and people really want to know what stands you out from the crowd. And if everybody's been to uni and everybody's got a degree, it's amazing, it shows you can apply yourself, but how are we going to differentiate? And giving your time and being curious and asking those questions, so important. So great, thank you so much. I think we all know you a little bit more now. Lex, let me come to you then. So,
Yvonne, can I say one point? I'm so sorry. Can I say one point on that? Because I think you're absolutely right, but I would add in, just because it's a social good sector doesn't mean that you have to work for free. I really have a major issue with this. We pay everybody in our organisation, from the person who's still in school to the person who is running a senior role. And I understand that it's difficult when you're not generating huge sums of cash to find that opportunity. But I think I fundamentally am opposed to unpaid internships and volunteering roles, because I think it's at the very heart of why this sector is so white, is so male, is so middle class.
You can only afford to do it if...
Absolutely. All of the things. I come from law. It's exactly the same background. If my family had not supported me going through law school, I would have struggled. I'm no smarter than all the other people. Honestly, I'm not. Right? We have to start tackling this. I think at the heart of the sector, one of the greatest problems is its lack of diversity of thought, diversity of experience. And unless we start challenging that and asking to be remunerated in practical terms for the expertise we have, the value that we bring, particularly as women, we are consistently undervalued, we have a real problem. So absolutely take all the opportunities, and if anybody in the room wants to have a conversation with me at any time about how you sensibly negotiate that, then do come and speak to me, because I feel profoundly passionate about, I'm sure that all of you add value, and in the same way that you don't want to have a conversation and waste your time as your most valuable commodity with someone who's scanning your shoulder to speak to someone more valuable, also do, of course, there may be an opportunity. If you can afford it, do it. That's absolutely true. We have all done it. But let's also try and change that standard as an industry. Otherwise, we are not going to see structural and systemic change.
I would even say not just pay anything, but pay according to...
Absolutely. London living wage is for the very minimum, even if you do a day of volunteering or internship.
But also I find this really... Sorry, we're totally derailing the questions.
Go. I'll get you back on track, but it's about...
I find this really interesting. You know, this whole thing around people pay you, like you're paying me for where I am now, not for the years of experience, for what I've learned. I can do this really quickly. Like I can speak on a panel, I can write your strategy. I'm doing it really quickly because I've spent 10 years learning how to do it. Just because, so this day rate thing, I hate this day rate thing. Oh, what's your day rate? I'll pay you for the day. Yeah, but it took me 10 years to learn that. Maybe for the 10 years it took me to learn how to do it in a day. And I think that value point is so important, right? Like, how we value ourselves and how the sector values us. And I think especially as like social change people, we're the good guys. That doesn't mean we should be paid less than the football CEOs. We should be paid more than the football CEOs.
It's hard. We didn't always get this right, but as soon as we were able to, and I think if we try, and I know that there is so little money in this sector, but we have to aspire to it. We have to reach for that, and we have to support each other in creating those paid opportunities.
Yeah. No, I think it's a really valid point, and actually from a perspective, so there'll be people in this room who perhaps sit as a trustee on a charity board or something like that. They're the kind of boardroom conversations, like how do we make it more accessible? You know, if you can't pay people for whatever reason, and there are voluntary opportunities, well, let's make sure as a minimum you're paying people's expenses, because ultimately they need to get there, they need to get home, they need to eat, and that's really important. So I think
the other piece on this like trustee board stuff, right? Like I have realized there is a reason why people on boards are not younger and often not women. Imagine if I said to my boss, I don't have one, which is why I'm on so many boards. Oh, by the way, I'm just leaving in the middle of my workday to go do my voluntary 3-hour thing over there. You don't get, no one lets you do this. It's in the middle of your workday. You have to have a certain amount of privilege. You have to be at a certain seniority to be able to go volunteer your time. And so women, carers, people that have children, they can't just do that because it's the evening and the morning and in the middle of the day. And can you drop in here and can you do an event on the weekend? I think we don't recognize what it takes for people to be trustees, to give their time. And then we wonder why there's no more women on boards. We're not being flexible so women can be on boards. Yeah. And yeah, absolutely, it's the expenses piece or paying them, but it's also just being flexible around when people can do it and working around them.
Yeah. I don't think the only reason that you're on so many boards is because you work for yourself.
One of the reasons.
I'm just Preeti's hype person here.
Yeah, there is a flip side of that, isn't there, as well, which is from a company point of view, valuing your employees and the enrichment. Like if I think back to the different committees and boards that I've sat on, what I have learned and been able to take into my organisation been massively valuable to my organisation. So you can't go and be on 5, but actually there is something. If you're a leader in an organisation, you're afforded that privilege to be able to offer somebody that opportunity. Like, that's a really good thing for your individual, for their team, for your employee value proposition, actually, in terms of how you attract staff, because you value. But I appreciate it's not open to sort of everybody. Lex, I'm going to come to you. So
Back on track. Sorry,
anyway, we're getting back because I'm on strict timelines
we
here.
told you this would happen.
Oh, good. I like fluid conversation. Can you tell us a little bit more then about how women and girls sport, and obviously particularly football, fits into the World Cup legacy plans in Qatar, and the work that you're doing at the foundation, strategy, and how's all that playing out, and in particular like some of the challenges that you face there?
Yeah, it's been a lot. So just as context, Qatar Foundation, because I'm sure many of you don't know about it, but it was founded over 25 years ago. We're 5,000 employees. We have a 12 square kilometer campus with 12 K through 12 progressive schools. We have one of the world leading women and children's hospitals. We have 6 universities, partner universities like Texas A&M and Georgetown. So we have a kind of captive student base. And we kind of have national assets that sit under us, and we incubate them before we spin them out. So Qatar National Library started with us, Qatar Philharmonic Orchestra, Qatar Diabetes Association, like these kinds of national assets. And then we have over 100 programs that service the community, from sports, culture, arts. So it's a very, very like wide-reaching, influential organization. It was started by the father Amir and his wife, who is a visionary and also our chairperson, Her Highness Sheikh Hamoza. And she essentially had this vision for education in Qatar. And Qatar Academy was the first co-ed school in Qatar. We now have, of our 12,000 students, 70% of them are women. 99% of our university women students outperform their male counterparts. And this was a long-term strategy by Her Highness. This is what she wanted to do. And in the lead up to the World Cup, they looked at the World Cup and they said, you know, this is more girls, particularly, are starting to play sport more. Women are starting to play more informal sport more because of the World Cup, because the entire nation was getting excited. How can we leverage that and use all of our assets and resources to actually make this a legacy and a priority of the Men's World Cup? And so that's something that I've been working on specifically. We're leading the national unified strategy. We're convening all the major sports stakeholders in the country to look at what this means. And as you can imagine, it has been challenging. All of the major sports stakeholders are run by men. Some of them conservative, some of them not, but all of them are men. It's chaired by my CEO, Her Excellency Sheikh Hind. Our leadership is actually 75% women. So Qatar Foundation is sort of rightly positioned and has the credibility to sort of lead this conversation, but it is not without its challenges, and particularly the challenge a lot, which is portrayed onto this region, which is that if you cover your head, you are oppressed. And actually, what we're seeing is that it's more oppressive to not offer women, in whatever way they want to do sport, that opportunity to do so. And so that is really what we're working on. We're working on apparel with a major brand supplier around how to make apparel really comfortable, really cool, whether it be modest sportswear, whatever they want to wear. We're looking at facilities. So there's a lot of ladies-only times, but they're like one at 8 a.m. and one at like 3 p.m. Well, if you work, you can't do that. If you're a mom, you can't do that. So how do we make facilities available for any woman, anytime, whenever they want to do it, if they want to do it in a ladies-only kind of environment. We're looking at pathways. A huge issue is that women, and this is not just in the region, but this is globally, we know that there's a huge dropout rate at 12 years old, around 12 years old for girls, for various reasons, but a lot of that research points to the fact that they feel more comfortable with a woman coach. We have a very, very small pathway of female referees, coaches, but also broadcasters, security, sales, marketing, the entire ecosystem. And I know this is like a global issue, but in Qatar specifically, it's a massive problem because really a lot of women just want to be in a women's only space. So that's really what we're looking at, and it's being underpinned by what I think is probably the most exciting thing I'm working on, which is on our campus, Education City. We have one of the 7 World Cup stadiums, Education City Stadium. We are transforming that right now into a home for women and girls sports at every level, which means that there will be community spaces, but we're also turning it into a high performance and elite training center. And it will be women's only. And we will hire security people who are women. We will hire IT people who are women. And we'll develop learning and internship programs, paid internship programs, where we can shadow and actually create this sort of entire ecosystem. So it's exciting, but it's super daunting. And yeah, if you want to help me out, let me know.
Well, I mean, it's huge, isn't it? But I don't know if you, I imagine you will be familiar with Sport England and This Girl Can, and, you know, all of the insight that you can take from there, because that whole notion of see it to be it was really transformative, actually, and going to obviously what you do and demonstrating the impact and really investing in research to be able to get to that point of social change and sustainable social change, because that's the key, isn't it? We do things and then we stop, and habits take a long time to form.
Yeah, and we're really lucky that we have, as I mentioned, 7 universities on campus, and we're actually doing some really interesting research with Northwestern, as well as our homegrown university. We interviewed in person 500 girls based in Qatar about what they thought were the biggest barriers to them playing sport, and it actually isn't really what you would think. Right. A lot of it was not like, my parents won't let me. A lot of it was like, there's not a place to play that I feel comfortable. Like, it's that type of thing. So, and those are things we can fix.
Exactly.
You know, those are addressable. I'm not saying the actual culture shift isn't, but a lot of this is kind of shifted by, as you're saying, perceiving that, oh, Education City Stadium, which is incredibly, you know, credible, renowned in the country, is actually a place that I can send my daughter to go do sports, and she will feel safe and she will feel comfortable, you know, and that in itself will change the culture. Yeah. But research is so crucial to this entire thing. Yeah. So yeah.
Great, and that's where global networks actually are really important, because that can be shared and learned. Kat, coming to you, from a club and governing body point of view, what can they do to use their power for good?
Yeah, lots, right? So I think we talk a lot about, and as I said, when we started out, we effectively started out as an advisory organisation for athlete activists. And that was a really interesting journey. We designed a strategy and how to work with each person to really clearly define what their authentic connection to a particular cause was, and then be really strategic about how you go about that. What is your greatest value add? Who should you be partnering with? How do you make it sustainable? And I think to Preeti's earlier point, how do you then ensure that you are able to tell compelling stories about the impact that you've had to inspire others and to get others along with you on that journey? And we were quite agile. When I started out, we did not work with clubs and leagues and federations and brands and UN agencies. But I think the sports sector has evolved quite significantly behind the times from what you would call the business and human rights sector. That's been going on for quite a long time now, where increasingly companies are being held to account. And I think a lot of that is, a lot of you are also, I'm also quite a lot older than most of you in the room. A lot of that is thanks to you and people who will use their purchasing power and their power as fans and their power as people buying goods and services to only buy from people whose values align with yours, right? And that has fundamentally changed the way that the sporting industry works. It's phenomenally important. It's been a key driver of change, and I think it's worth emphasizing that, because it can be very disheartening when we see these major global issues, whether it's climate change or systemic racial injustice or gender inequity. But actually, I do genuinely think you can track the changes that people like you are bringing through even small individual acts to major corporations, clubs and leagues acting differently. So we pivoted around that. And I think we employed many of the same tactics. So personally and as an organization, we want to be really coherent. So the way that I talk about my organization and the way that you may go away and speak about my organization, I want that all to be consistent and mainstream throughout everything that we do, right? So you live your values on a day-to-day basis. So we started with that premise and realized that actually there is now much more appetite in a commercial and corporate sector to start doing that. what they call that in the business and human rights sector, human rights due diligence. It's really interesting. It's like a body scan of a business or an organization. You say, what matters to you, and do you live those values at every single level? So we do a lot of that work now, and it's really interesting. And I think the key themes that come out consistently for sports governing bodies, and this is so boring, and it took me so long to just accept this. But I'm a bit like Preeti and her measurement and evaluation nerd. I'm a governance nerd. Right? If you don't get the basic governance of your organization correct, how you elect people, how you make decisions, how you distribute and monitor money, that's where the power sits, right? Those are the people making all of the decisions on a day-to-day basis. And if they don't look like us, if they don't sound like us, if they don't understand what people want and need, and if they're not serving, this is your servant leadership piece, they are not serving the communities that they are purporting to represent because they lack that diversity, I think that's one of the greatest issues. So I think that governance piece is really, really important. And I think people need to get, sports bodies, I say this consistently, need to get their own house in order first. From a corporate perspective, I think diversity and mainstreaming those, really what does that mean? Diversity of thought, diversity of representation, experience, etc. Those are the key things that need to happen first. And then again, you don't reinvent the wheel, right? This is the same when we work with athletes and they go, we want to set up a charity for X. We go, is there already someone doing this really, really effectively? Have you thought about common goal? Can you funnel your funds and legacy and influence and platform in a really influential way through collective action? And you'll save all of the hassle and the costs of running charities, which we've all done, and running businesses, and it's really, really, really boring and tiresome and hard work and costly. And it's the same with commercial sectors, it's the same with governance bodies, it's the same with clubs, right? Is there something that we can rely on? Is there a framework or a structure that we look to? And for me, it's the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, and they talk about protecting, respecting, and promoting human rights. So you protect human rights and all of those values in your own house first. Then you think about how all of your supply chain, your stakeholders, which sponsors you work with, which taxi firms you employ, right? Everybody, which clothing brands and apparel you partner with, do they share those values? And you can have a huge influence through that. And then let's talk about promoting it. And I think that's where people get it wrong. They skip straight to promotion, and then people criticize them because they look disingenuous, right? So I think it's that framework, and it's those basic principles around governance that are, for me, a priority for the sports sector.
Can I just say one thing on the governance piece, Kat, because I think it's so crucial that we're seeing right now a lot of organizations that didn't get that governance situation right in our sector really falling down now. Not just in terms of not having diversity, but true issues with how unpaid interns have been treated, how potentially male staff are working with their female junior counterparts. Like, if the governance structure isn't right, there's no checks and balances for that. And I feel like as a sector, we need to seriously look at that. So just having that as a guiding principle for the entire sector, I think, is such a good point, but really timely for right now for this sector.
Yeah, great point. And just building on that then, Preeti, you've worked with over 800 organisations in that sort of community space, helping them to demonstrate their impact. And we know there are lots of corporate organisations that want to get involved, but importantly need to do it in a really genuine and authentic sort of way. They don't really know necessarily where to start. Like, how do we join the dots on that to kind of create something that is seamless, that's genuine and impactful, that means that organisation has got the opportunity to promote and tell the story when it's doing it right?
It's exactly what Kat said, right? Like, don't jump to the solution. Like, don't jump on the bandwagon of, and we're seeing it a lot now, the word purpose. Everyone's using the word purpose. Gen Z likes purpose. Brands want to be purposeful. What does that mean to you? Do the work, because it is going to come across disingenuous and unauthentic if you're just jumping straight to the solution. I mean, we know, like, back in the day, CSR, I mean, it still exists, but this notion of, like, as a brand, as a company, I'll give some money to do some good, right? And that still exists. It usually sits within brands' marketing teams, which tells you something, right? This notion of, like, I want to jump on the social good bandwagon, you can do that by doing philanthropy, donate money to an organization that's doing it really well. But if you really want to join those dots, It's for you to figure out where can you make the most impact. What does meaningful impact look like to you? And that has to start from within. Get your own house in order. Talk to your staff. Understand what this means for you. Look at your supply chain. It's, you know, it's for you going, this is something that's important to us because we want to be representative of the communities that we live and work in. And therefore, this is something we talk about all the time at Brentford, right? It's about living those values. Who is our local community? How can we add value to them? And you start at that point, and then you start to look at, okay, so if this is what's important to us, is somebody already doing it? Who can we partner with? How can we collaborate? How can we share? How can we come together, collective action? Because then, and from a measurement standpoint, right, it's then very easy to measure impact because we know what our goal is. We know our so what. We know our why. And then we're working backwards from it, saying if that's where we want to get to, and here's where we are now, here are all the steps we take together, here are other people that can add value, here's somebody that's bringing something new. That's how we get to a goal. And so but people don't want to do the work. Organizations don't want to do the work. And if you just want to come to the solution at the end, then go give some money to somebody who's doing it right. But don't call it impact and don't call it sport for social change. It's not social change if you're just giving somebody some money.
Yeah. For a tax break.
For a tax break, absolutely.
Do you know what I'm seeing a lot, obviously being on the board of Beyond Sport, where we work with a large amount of brands and everything, and we're seeing a lot of wanting to get in this space on the bandwagon, as you say, but with big numbers, and they don't necessarily know what that means. So there's a lot of, we want to affect 10 million lives. Where did you get that number? What does that, what? 10 million lives? And also that is coming from their marketing agency because it sounds good. So then it's the entities like ours that have to manifest that and make it a reality. And that's also the thing is challenging them on what do you mean? Because as you know, 10 million lives impacted is that is really hard work. Yeah. And is actually, you're probably lying at the end of the day. So what is...
And what is impacted?
Yeah,
exactly.
They mean reach.
They
really mean, they mean spoke to once. They mean watched a TikTok video I did.
Yeah.
So connecting the dots to me right now is kind of getting companies to understand that their impact and telling the story of that impact, it doesn't necessarily need to be a number.
Yeah.
The story can be about the young person and that life that you changed, or the
stories
organization.
are more powerful, right? Because actually it shows the difference that you are making. Numbers are great. Numbers are always going to be needed. There's no getting away from that. But then it's the layers that sit beneath. And I think you're right to point out the fact that this sector is very collaborative. There can be lots in professional sport that's very closed and it's protect the USP and nobody can know kind of where we're at. Whereas in our work, you have to work together because there's no one single organisation that's going to fix the world problems. There's absolutely no way. Jürgen, let me come to you. I mean, we've heard a little bit about your organisation, but give us a little bit more insight in terms of what it does, why it exists, and how that functions, because it seems like it's a real kind of portal for enabling things in a really impactful way.
Yeah, I think that's the word, you chose the right words in terms of enabling. Because we're not a typical organization, if you want. We, in an ideal world, we exist to disappear. We don't want to be there for long. The sooner we disappear, the better our work has been. So we live for making others successful in what we believe is necessary, which is maximizing football's contribution to people and planet. So how do we work? We have 3 strands of work. One is making a contribution, a financial contribution to people and planet into how the business works in football. That means we want a 1% contribution of every euro or every pound that is being earned thanks to commercializing the game to impact. And therefore we make service offerings to all stakeholders to enable them to do the thing, not to pay us, but as an organization, but to do their thing and own it and do it their way. So that's one piece. We started with athletes. There's now around about 200 athletes doing it on the basis of their earnings. Not surprisingly, close to half of them are female. Then there's a number of clubs, there's a number of institutional leaders, there's a number of of managers and coaches. So that's one piece. The other one is like building on the legacy of what I mentioned earlier, which was Street Football World, like surfacing all the entrepreneurs on the ground in the communities, actually implementing and generating, creating the impact. And on that side of things, how can we allow them, how can we make their work as easy as possible, which has to do with visibility, which has to do with finances. So here we're looking at obviously hundreds, if not thousands, of organizations, and how can we build like a football for good reality in terms of global accessibility to everyone. So that's the second piece, and if you want, there's also a connection between the two, like money in, money out kind of thing. Like there's a trusted portfolio of organizations that actually turn your contribution into real impact. And the third we're just getting our noses into is how can we make progress transparent to everyone, like, or the lack of it. So like thinking about a real-time, that's something actually we should talk about.
You heard it here first.
To think about like how can we use how can we use blockchain, how can we make it participatory, how can we use existing data, to make it also, to turn it inspiration, like a reference people can rely to can rely to in order to how can I actually get there if I want to. Yeah. Maybe just so that's common goal. The thing I wanted to just add to what has mentioned before by the three of them, which I all agree with. There is, I think, that if we come to system change and scale, where we as common goal think or want to put our focus on is actually on a mindset shift. We see the scale there. To change systems is really hard. Like existing systems, they tend to be too slow, they tend to not understand, they tend to be change averse. They're built to be that. So it's really hard. If I might, I take just three topics. One is the redefinition of success. Like, what do we understand as success? Currently, still, there's a high level of acceptance of success just being equal to individual accumulation, even doing harm to people and planet. So that is still very accepted as success. So how can we turn that around? How can we make success being based on contribution? Like, instead of having $1 million on your bank account, how can you help 1 million people? Like that shift. So I think redefinition of success is one. Giving value to collaboration. Like really understand collaboration as, I think, personally, it's the biggest innovation of the century, if we manage to get it right. It sounds easy, simple, it sounds like no-brainer, but it is not being done. It's not being performed. Nobody gets into it, really. And nobody values it, because it takes away from your own brand equity, it takes away from your own recognition as individual organization, as individual person. And you just have to get beyond, I think we have all to get beyond the fact that we as an organization, we as an individual, we can't do anything meaningful if it's not within a wider goal set, which the United Nations try to achieve. And we never get there because we don't agree that this is what we want to achieve collectively as humanity. And me as Brentford Football Club, me as consultant, me as Qatar Foundation, us as Common Goal, we all do what we can do in order to achieve that collectively. And we will all benefit from it. There is a return, even a commercial return. So that's the second. And the third is actually, like, why do we exist as an organization? Why do we exist as a company, as a commercial company even? Like this idea of a servant leadership, I meant, like the redefinition of what does leadership mean, or what does even entrepreneur mean? As long as we continue to think that self-serving leadership is leadership, we won't get to the other two, like to the collaboration. We won't get to the redefinition of success. So to shift from acceptance of self-serving leadership to a servant leadership, which means like I define my own leadership as in the privilege that I have been given to lead something, being it my own life or being it an organization or a company. How do I turn that in the biggest possible benefit for people and planet? So I think that these three concepts, maybe just to add to what already has been.
I think it's really interesting, this notion, right, of, and I think this side of football is so different to the other side, like what Jürgen was talking about, what we're all talking about here. This notion of football being a public good. It is for everybody. It is for everyone to use. And just because I have it doesn't mean there's less of it for you. That's what it should be, right? It's like parks, it's like air. It is for everyone, but we have put all these barriers, subscriptions, cost, facilities. These are all things we have put so that you can't access something because I want to monetize it, because I want to commercialize it. And I think the beauty of the side of football that we work in is trying to move that back, is to say football is for everyone. Everyone should be able to access it. Everyone should get these wonderful benefits that we know exist. But how do we break these structures that have existed for so long? And I think what the privilege that you have is you're kind of getting to do it all over again. And the beauty of women's football is we're kind of getting to do it all over again. We're looking at how we did it badly the first time, and we get to build another football. And that is an extraordinary thing. 10 years from now, we're going to look back on this moment and hopefully think we did it right the second time.
Well, rest assured, there's plenty of processes and systems in place in Qatar that need to be overcome. But what I also love about about what you said about it, but what is interesting is that it came full circle, is the UN SDGs. We can't all agree on them. I think the bigger issue is what you guys were talking about, which is like everyone just wants to market that they're doing something about it, and they're not actually doing anything about it. Like it's almost like worked against the amazing marketing around the UN SDGs, have almost like worked against it, where you have like insane projects like projections onto the UN building and like sailboats, like, you know, with the UN SDG brands on them and stuff, which is fine. But like the actual what we're doing to collaborate to address the UN SDGs is like not really there. So it's going back to that whole thing around the marketing before you have your own house in order and the impact that you're making.
Yeah, it's about being pure, isn't it? And doing it for the right reasons and not for all the razzmatazz. That's not what this industry exists to be.
Because also, if you do it right, the razzmatazz will come.
No, you can totally have the razzmatazz. Like, I think that's fine.
But don't lead with it. Don't lead with it.
Yeah, you need to like actually do the, as you said, do the work and make the impact. And like I think the issue around a lot of this is the desire to market and say you're doing it.
Yeah.
So yeah.
No, well, listen, I mean, I could talk for hours and hours on this. I can't believe we've literally whizzed through an hour. I'm so sorry we don't have time for questions, but our panellists are staying. Oh, I've got 5 minutes. I've been gifted 5 minutes. There we go. Okay. Brilliant. I've got 5. Okay, right, excellent. So we've got 5 minutes for questions. You're going to get your hands up and let's...
Somebody in the back. Oh, God, jeez.
Right, there was a question right at the back first. Have we got a mic? Okay, brilliant, thank you.
Like what Brentford are doing in terms of working with schools in particular and creating opportunities for, like, I'm teaching myself, that's my professional job, and coaching as well, and it's really directly impacting social change within a school setting. Something in schools is where the most social impact can happen. So I just wanted to know what your view is how Brentford impacted in the local area, and what role do you think that other clubs like my club, like Chelsea, but like maybe they do more to impact their local communities, and how that becomes such
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a great question, and you know, Jill was talking about it earlier, right? Like schools is really where we are seeing that, you know, the drop-off rates, the big pickup, the opportunity to try something. That's why what the Lioness has done, all this money that's going into school. That's why everyone's fighting for this stuff, because that's where we can really have meaningful impact and give young people the opportunity to experience a purer form of sport. right? And so, for us as a club, it's super important, and we've always looked at how do we add to something rather than reinvent the wheel. There's really great work happening in the community already. Where can we amplify what's already happening? Where can we build something that isn't? Where can we fund something that needs funding? And to everyone's point here, this isn't about one club trying to do something better than somebody else, right? This is us saying, what does our community need? And ironically, we saw this during the pandemic, it's not that the things you think football clubs would do. Turns out we can do food aid and shelter, and we can do medical supplies. Turns out we can be, we can work in schools, and we should look at racism. We can be role models for people growing up in the community, whether or not they like football, right? And so I think for us, the point as a club is like, what does our community need? That's not for us to decide. Are we talking to them so we can understand where we can add value, and then how we collaboratively building structures that will exist long after Brentford changes their mind, right? That's the point. You get a new owner, you drop a league, you have less money. Are we building something sustainable so it carries on even when we're not there? And I think, football clubs generally in this country do a great job, or their CCOs do a great job. For us at the club, we very much look at our community trust does a fantastic job already. We don't want to replicate what they're doing. How can we add value to them?
I think that's a really great point, isn't it? Adding value and also not jump into that solution, like taking the time to find out whatever setting you're in. Right, we've got one more question, that's it. I've got a 1 minute sign, sorry, yes.
I'm well aware of the Qatar Foundation's longevity and the funding that's been put behind it in that 25 years. But if we draw a line in the sand and moving forward, what does the World Cup legacy look like around raising awareness around LGBT plus inclusion and visibility?
So the Supreme Committee for Delivery and Legacy is responsible officially for the World Cup legacy. Qatar Foundation is responsible for how we as an organization are leveraging the World Cup to deliver on our objectives around social progress, around education, around precision medicine, around sustainability. So we have our core values and our core objectives that we are trying to use the World Cup to prioritize key initiatives that Qatar Foundation is responsible for. So the overall, I cannot speak to the overall what the Supreme Committee for Delivery and Legacy is committing to do, particularly around LGBTQ. That is not where I sit. I sit with Qatar Foundation. But what I can say from our perspective in Qatar Foundation, what we do is trying to address issues within our community. And we are starting with girls and women's sports because that is where our key challenges lay in terms of the women and girls that go to our schools and the increase of obesity and these types of things, the dropouts and that type of stuff. So that's really what we're looking at. That's our objectives. LGBTQ does not sit within our objectives as a foundation.
Some of those women and young girls are LGBT+.
Totally. Yeah, exactly. So
what are you doing?
So we're breaking down the barriers, whatever barrier that is, so that they can participate in sport. It is not for us to judge someone if they are LGBTQ to come and use our facilities, to come and use our programs. Our key thing here is trying to reduce the barriers to that.
Thank you, Lex. Thank you. Sorry, we are off time. Sorry about that. Can I just say a massive thank you to our panel? Really, really do appreciate all of your input. It's been fantastic, really insightful collaboration, listening, knowing your purpose and being really focused on that. Lots of entry points. I'm sure our panel will be around for coffee. You have got a coffee break now. We could go on, but last year's feedback was we absolutely want the coffee breaks. We want that opportunity to meet each other. So enjoy the rest of your session. Thank you so much. Cheers.